Today's guest is someone who didn't just pivot into real estate. He went all in before he turned 30, drained his 401k, and bet on himself to build a portfolio that now spans over 20 mobile home and RV parks across the Midwest and Southeast. Ryan Groene is the co-founder of Treeside Capital, and since 2015, he's been in the trenches, operating parks, raising capital, dealing with flaky managers, partner buyouts, last-minute investor dropouts, all of it. He's seen this industry evolve from mom and pop deals to institutional interest, and he's still here scaling through the noise. Ryan, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me on, Leo. And that seems a lot more glamorous than what it actually was, but here we are, 2025, still here. So I'm glad to be a guest, and hopefully I'll bring some good content and all that good jazz.
Let's dive into it. So give the audience some context. How did you get here? What was your journey up till this point?
You covered a lot of it. So I have a similar background to you. I was not as fancy in work on Wall Street, which I don't know if your guests know that, but whatever. I was trained in college to, go work on Wall Street, work in finance, have a finance degree. Read Rich Dad Poor Dad in college, kind of changed my mindset a little bit, and I had the entrepreneurial kind of bug kind of more early than most. So growing up, my parents actually looked at buying a bunch of stuff, but never did. So in my teenage years, I remember being dragged to like car washes, laundromats, duplexes, all that good stuff. That never happened for my parents. They just, they never pulled the trigger. So I think kind of maybe just through seeing that and kind of maybe seeing a different avenue of life versus getting a job working for 40 years and retiring, which there's nothing wrong with that. It just wasn't for me. I learned that very early on in my corporate career. I realized that, I probably wasn't going to be sitting at a desk for the next 40 years, but I maybe thought I could expedite it to 20 by investing heavily in my 401k and potentially buying like a small duplex here and there, live in it, refi it, move into the other one, kind of do that along the way in my 20s and get an early start and retire by 40. That was my main goal. Have enough of my 401k and enough maybe stocks or investments to retire by 40, right? That was kind of my main goal coming out of college. I knew that early on. And then I didn't end up actually buying anything, any businesses, any of that nature. I stumbled on mobile home park investing, which is my main focus in the last 10 years, simply by just accident. I looked at flipping a mobile home, which is a good way for anybody that wants to flip or get into real estate. It is a lower cost option and a lower cost alternative because you're maybe going to spend 20 to 40 grand max or 5 to 10 grand in certain markets. Upwards of 100, but you're still well below the medium, single family housing, which is, 200, 300, 400,000. And then you got a whole other bunch of issues that go along with that. So I stumbled on mobile home park investing simply by just looking to flip a mobile home. I did not do that. And then just kind of going down the rabbit hole of who owns mobile home parks. What is this business? And I did it the long and hard way. I still worked on my corporate job. And then at nights and weekends, I was building my own database. I did not pay a VA once up until probably the last couple of years. I was making my own direct mailers. Like I was printing them off, signing them. I was handwriting them. I was doing all that fun stuff that took a lot of effort, but it was a high yield that didn't actually end up any deals that I ended up buying, but it kind of got me in the routine of looking at deals, analyzing deals, talking with owners, meeting other partners, potential partners. And that kind of led into kind of the next kind of investing phase of my life. It took me 2 years to buy my first park. But at the same time, I'd met a couple guys through just networking. We looked at buying a couple parks together. I was living in Cincinnati at the time. Then I moved to Cleveland, Ohio. These guys had bought a couple parks and they were like, hey, we need some help running them. Would you be interested in kind of being our operations person? It was a part-time job. It allowed me to kind of learn quickly how to run multiple mobile home parks from heavy value add to, stabilized deals, selling homes, doing infill. Like I did all of it along the way. And then was buying my own parks too at the same time. And what you mentioned is I did empty my 401k, bought it with a couple partners. And then, we ended up selling that a couple years later. But that's kind of what's brought me along today. We do raise money and we do buy RV parks and mobile home parks. Primarily our focus over the next 24, 36 months is mobile home parks only. I think that's kind of where the next phase of investing is if you're in the MH space already. We're at a different level at kind of where we are operationally. It's not our first acquisition. So our deal criteria is a little bit different than most. But we also want the same thing everybody else wants, right? So it's kind of led me to where we are today. I've been doing it full time now since 2018. So, it's good, bad, and it's been hard along the way too. So.
Hmm. I think you did what a lot of people dreamed of doing, and some people, including your parents, they haven't pulled the trigger, right? I think that leap into entrepreneurship, especially for you going full time essentially before you were ready, right? Was there a moment that you were like, okay, I'm gonna do this? And was there also a moment that you were like, well, maybe this wasn't the right thing to do?
I have those moments every day. Meaning when you're the boss or the entrepreneur or whatever you want to call it, where you're kind of the head of it all. There are days like that. You're questioning why you do it more times than, in like more times than not, at least my personality, than the good times, right? They're good and bad times created equally, but there are bad days, there are good days, but most of the time it's mainly just monotonous and boring, just like working that W-2 job every day, day in, day out for years after years. It becomes monotonous and boring, and can be, right? But that is really where kind of the bread and butter is of running a business, is in the monotony. It sucks, but that's kind of, it's not flashy. While we're doing a podcast and that'll look flashy on social media, right? The day in, day out, like it is semi boring, which is good. That means you have a fairly stable business. If you are chaotic, or it is chaotic, you need to create systems and processes to make it less chaotic, because we are all there and we all experience that. So in the beginning, I knew what I wanted to do. And I knew once I found mobile home parks, I realized that there was nothing else that I was going to do. And it's stuck that way, but we have pivoted into other asset classes. And along the way, working for those two guys also helped me, because it was a small source of income that I did have. So it allowed me to kind of go a little bit more full time, a little bit quicker than most, right? I also did not have kids, and I was not married, and I don't have a mortgage. So I didn't have a huge overhead. And I wasn't afraid to go be in the parks and live in the parks if I needed to. That is another thing that there was no other option for me, right? So I had drained all of the money I ever had in my life and bought it with a few partners. That was the first deal. Then the next deal, I was the manager, or the asset manager, right? So I was the pinpoint in the deal. Maybe I had found the deal, and then also I was the operator of the deal. So that continued along the way, and we've continued to be the operator. We're invested in parks, and we're not operators of all the deals, but we may be general partners on the deals, or active joint ventures where we may not operate the day to day, but we definitely check in, right? So we make sure that the asset is running well. Really, the main thing that, I questioned it along the way. I had been questioned. I don't necessarily get questioned too much anymore, but in the beginning, up until probably 2020 or 22, my mom asked me when I was getting a job. And I said, I'm not getting a job, Mom. This is what I'm doing. She just, it was more of a mother loving care than like just not knowing what she didn't know, right? So we laugh about it now, but there are times where you're always, you push it all in and then you have to recoup and take some chips off the table. But in the beginning, I knew I was going to do it. So I probably was more confident in myself than I maybe put out there. But I was highly educated. I dove all in learning the business, and then also being in the business and running a business, right? Running the parks definitely helped. Working for those guys allowed me to kind of learn firsthand. So if you have the opportunity and you're looking to get into real estate or another business, there's nothing wrong with taking like a part-time job in that business, because you will learn a lot more than you will talking to somebody, or, but I also knew every park in kind of the Ohio, Indiana, Kentucky area, because I built my own database by hand and also mailed everything myself. So I did a lot myself, which I think is important in the beginning, unless you have a little bit more disposable income to invest. I think it's important to get to know your markets, and then also learning every park and kind of the ins and outs of what makes a park unique. But, once you scale past 5 parks, that's when you become like an entrepreneur or business. If you buy 1 or 2 deals, you can get away with a little bit of not necessarily being lazy, but you don't necessarily have to implement kind of the systems and processes that I may have at a little bit larger scale. So, yeah. So to answer your question, always good times, always bad times. I always question, we question ourselves typically, not necessarily daily, but maybe weekly, right? What are we doing? Why are we doing this? Because that is a necessity to kind of look at the bigger picture of your overall season of your life too, right? Because there are seasons in life that a lot of people don't talk about. You have acquisition seasoning, where you may go on this buying spree. And then there may be times like the last 2 years, we haven't bought a thing. So there's been a lot of like what am I doing wrong? Am I missing deals? Why are they buying deals and I'm not? But it was really just fundamentally comes down to the deals may make sense for them, but it may not make sense for us, either due to a number of reasons, right? It could be just they're looking to add pad count, they got a 1031. There's a lot of things on why people buy real estate and why they pay certain things, but there can be a time where, there's just different seasons of life. And if you're 50 years old and you got enough money to buy one park that's 100 sites, you may be able to replace your income relatively quickly by one park, right? It's just the nature of your own life and figuring out how investments work for you too.
So you touched on an interesting point. I think as an entrepreneur, right, everyone has different resources available to them depending on when they make that leap, perhaps. If you make it earlier on, then you probably have less money, but you have more grit, you have more resourcefulness, which it seems like you definitely had moving into a park. Which, by the way, what was it like to move into a park, and like how has it impacted operations?
Let me rephrase that. I did not move into a park. I may have misspoke and said that I would have moved into a park, but I was at the parks enough to where it felt like I lived there. Now, I still would move into a park if I had to, but I'm 35-year-old Ryan versus 25, 27-year-old Ryan is a lot different. And it's just like you said, I still have the same grit, but I'm definitely not as I definitely am not necessarily it's not the same type of hunger that I had back then, right? So, meaning I needed a deal more than I wanted to do anything else. I don't necessarily need a deal as much nowadays because I have done a number of deals to where it's just another deal, right? It may be, what I mean by that is I look at it return on time now versus back then I didn't care. I had a lot more time, right? And kind of the next phase of my life is getting married. I just got married, having kids. So my time will be less. So thank you. So it's kind of like, what is the return on headache and return on time going to be for this asset or this park? And that's kind of where that kind of shift comes after you buy a handful of deals or you've had a business for a number of years, right? You're more looking to drive typically revenue to increase, more time freedom. That is a lot of times in the beginning, you suck all your time into it, and then it kind of can outflow in the end that your time is more dedicated to other things because you've hired people to kind of take and replace your time, right, on stuff that you were doing. So that is important. As delegation is a hard skill for a lot of people, and we still deal with I still do a lot of things myself. It is what it is. I just prefer to do it that way. I still pay bills. I could probably hand that off. I still look at all the bills, but we've centralized the system to where I can look at all of 20 properties. I can look at all the bills and pay all the bills with one click. So it's a lot quicker than individual bills. Also, I do know people that have lived in parks or been in parks, but I was in the parks enough, and I was the on-site manager at some of these parks during stints of time. So in essence, quote unquote, I lived there, but we've kind of changed our philosophy on how we hire nowadays. All of our parks do not have to have an on-site manager. They do not have to live there. That used to be a requirement that we kind of required, right? Majority of our we may still have somebody kind of be the eyes and ears of the community, but I do not need somebody to live there anymore if the asset is large enough. They can live off site, come to the office 3 to 5 times a week, and as long as collections and rules are enforced, I don't care as much as what I, maybe thought back in the beginning. So yeah, anybody can kind of transition themselves into the real estate play or business if you're willing to kind of be the operator or be the boots on the ground and kind of take that grunt work, which is where the money is right now. If you can do that, there's not a lot of folks out there that are willing to do it. If you have more time, you can plug yourself into a deal relatively quickly, and it can happen, but you have to be educated, and also you have to obviously be resourceful. That's probably the most important thing. It's just kind of getting it done and figuring out how to do it.
So on just a couple of things that you said, actually, I have heard directly opposite of just conventional wisdom, right? When you're talking about mobile home parks, like same as me, like when you're learning it, you hear these things. It's like, hey, when you're getting started, you should live in the mobile home park. People are like, oh, you have to show your investors that you care enough to do that. But I think the reality is that you don't have to be, as long as the house is taken care of, right? So,
Exactly.
what are some things that you sort of learned that were maybe taught in courses by coaches, mentors, what have you, but that in reality isn't so true.
That you have to, that the biggest thing is that your on-site manager typically has the best house. They're, typically husband and wife. The husband will fix things and the wife will kind of collect rent and take care of the tenants. That is the tradition, and you just pay them, you just give them free lot rent, right? That's kind of been the old school mentality, right? But we will do that, and but we also typically we pay our managers as well, because there is a lot of things that they do that just for free lot rent they shouldn't be doing, right? Now, in certain instances, that's all we do. We will give them free lot rent, but we may not ask them to do certain things. They may have to pass out flyers, take some pictures of the park occasionally, and pass out notices. But other than that, we're not having them field calls. They're not walking the park every day. They're not out selling homes. They're not doing all these things. We kind of either offload that to offsite, or we just don't expect them to do it, right? Because there's a lot of things that managers, it is a mobile home park, and at the end of the day, these people that live there and the managers are typically not, $500,000 to $1 million salaries, right? So their skill set, they're typically skilled in one thing, right? They may not be tech savvy, so we kind of offload to the back office. When you go through the courses, they teach you that your manager should be your salesperson, your rule enforcement, your collections, and also, your eyes and ears of the community, which in reality, that's like 4 jobs in one, and you're expecting it from like a minimum wage job. That's just not going to happen, right? So once you get enough scale, or you buy an asset that's large enough, you can have multiple people kind of take those roles, whether it be on site or in the back office. So we've centralized one thing that we've done is we've centralized kind of the sales process if we have a new home. And we've also centralized collections, leasing, and kind of rule enforcement, right? So the manager will, like every week, we meet with our managers and we meet with our collection specialist / leasing agent. Any lease that goes through our community or prospect, she runs the application. She then talks with the manager on what space they're going in, if they're a good fit, if they met them, and then they process the payment, send the lease, and that's all done by one person. Collection calls are typically done in a combo, but it's typically our collection specialist offsite, kind of texting, calling, emailing, trying to figure out when they're going to pay. And the manager is going to pass out notices, right? Because they're the boots on the ground. They'll post the 7-day notice. We also set whatever 3-day notice, whatever the late notice is. But a lot of times they're not collecting rent like they used to be. That is centralized offsite, by online, paying over the phone, or paying at a certain vendor, right? Walmart or Kroger's or whatever have you. So we've taken a lot of stuff off of our managers because we were having so many of the same conversations, and we were expecting our managers to be like super tech savvy, right? Like send me text messages, and they can barely text you, and you're asking them for a million photos, and then doing sales and doing all this. And it's like, so we just kind of took a lot off their plate, which has helped with collections, helped with rule enforcement, and helped just kind of be in a better overall cleaner operation. That way we can all be on the same page, kind of, month over month. So, and you don't, when you're showing your investors that you care by hiring the right people in the right roles. And we still touch our assets, but I'm not there as frequently as what I used to be, unless it's a massive turnaround. I'm still involved. I still take tenant phone calls. I still deal with tenants from time to time, but I typically let my manager make the decision. What do you think, right? We always ask, if they ask me a question and I know the answer, I really want their opinion. I probably know the answer or what I would do, but I really want them to kind of weigh in and kind of have that thought process of like, you have the authority to make decisions up to a certain dollar amount, or if you think it's a rule violation and they need to clean up their yard, or it's a tenant that just needs to go, that is your call at the end of the day, if it's within reason and legal capacity, because I'm not the one dealing with them day in, day out, listening to people complain about that person, or they're not a rule follower, or they're always late on rent, right? Like, I'm not dealing with it because I'm not there. All I'm seeing is typically, I'm listening to you as the manager, and I'm seeing what's on the screen. I may go 3 to 5 times a year to the parks, but I may not talk to a single tenant the time I'm there. I do talk to tenants, just as that's my personality, because I want to know what's going on, but I do not have the time to talk to 1,000 to 1,500 residents on a yearly basis. So
For sure. And I think based on what you're saying, people, especially investors, right? They don't understand the distinction between, call it like a small operation for mobile home parks versus like, a large like Blackstone, Sun Communities. Like, they don't touch their assets. It's not like the principal's flying out to Tennessee to go see their mobile home park. Like, they have systems that they set up and resources and stuff. So I think for you to sort of transition and build out the back office, I think that's an important distinction to even properly managing the assets, right? And not just being the one person. Because a common thing I
Exactly.
hear, well, something I hear people say is that there's keyman risk. It's like, what if the GP gets hit by a bus? Like, what happens, right? But when you build systems like this, then that sort of mitigates the impact that something like this could have.
Let's touch on that real quick because we get that question all the time, right? What preventive action plan do you have in place? I have a business partner and he could step in and kind of run it. But if you're only buying like 3 to 5 parks or you're buying a few parks, and let's just say it's just you, right? Or you and your wife or you and a business partner. If one of you get hit by a bus and die, even if you have an on-site manager, you're probably going to end up selling the park in the reality anyways, because it's going to be too much of a traumatic scenario just emotionally for somebody to handle that. That's why when the husband dies and they did all the business and the wife takes over, the park typically can go to shit, or they can, it's hard for them to run it because it's an emotional attachment that reminds them of a tragic event. So more than likely, you're really just going to end up selling the asset. That's really what happens in reality. Everybody talks about, like, if I get hit by a bus, my team can keep running it. Yeah, that'll be the case for 6 months, but then everybody's going to be like, I'm done with this, let's sell it. Or the manager quits, and then you're really screwed because, there's not these, even if you have a third party manager, that manager may be doing a really bad job, so you have to fire them. But in the meantime, your partner died, so now what? So in reality, I think you can talk about the plan. It's just more of like a nice blanket when you're cold, right? You're just going to end up selling the asset unless you have a massive team where we're not at that level where you're talking Sun, like the 5 big REITs and then Blackstone, like those groups that have so much, like think like large corporations, like think Walmart. Like when Sam Walton died, they had enough. They could Amazon, right? Those are so big of an animal that it's okay. They can survive the major player dying. Apple honestly almost didn't survive when what's his name, who was Steve
Steve?
Jobs, passed away. But Tim Cook has actually been the CEO longer now than he was. So it has survived, but that was just due to, timing and preparation. But for a while they did struggle. Just like Elon Musk is tied to Tesla, like, if he passed away, I don't know if that company may cease to exist because of the image that he's created with Tesla, right? So, but those are such large corporations that people are going to continue to work. The direction of the company may just slow up. But in reality, unless the person has 10,000 units or more, is maybe 5,000 units, you're going to end up selling the asset typically anyways, or assets, because it's just going to be too much of a traumatic event probably. And you also deal with, if that person has a spouse and they want to be cashed out, you're going to have to, there are certain metrics within operational agreements, but most of the time they get sold over the course of like 2 years, right? You're not going to hold that asset for 10 years. Very, very rare in reality. So
Yeah, that's a fair point. I think that's sort of when the rubber meets the pavement, kind of like there's some things that sound nice on paper versus what will actually happen, right?
yeah, and that's the majority of your buyer, like sellers, right? The traumatic event happened within the last 36, 48 months. Mom and pop got sick, one of them did, one of them died, or one is sick, and it's a selling event, right? That is a life event that creates a sale, right? And that is the motivated seller that we are looking for. It is a tragic event, but that is a motivated seller. If you were to define what a motivated seller is, they're highly motivated because of a traumatic event that may have happened. It is just life and it happens. So, but that creates a motivated seller, and it can be a good buying opportunity. It's a really, really bad, kind of a analogy that I'm making, but that is the reality of life, right? You die, you get sick, you got divorces. Those things happen, and typically assets just end up getting sold. I mean, in reality.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, the three big things is death, divorce, and disease, right? I mean, that's
Yeah,
just
exactly.
the reality of things. And we like to
Mm.
think of business as numbers on a spreadsheet, but it's people. It's people in seats, people doing things. So I guess so for your operation, for your business, how have you been sort of growing? Just sort of how did you get from your first mobile home park to where you are now? How did you see growing your team, growing the back office? Was there like a clear distinction where you're like, okay, I need to build a back office, or was it gradual, like taking on the seventh park?
Yeah.
Like, Okay.
It was gradual, but it was also out of necessity, right? So in 2022, we bought like 10 or 14 parks. We bought a lot, and it was both a new asset class. We bought RV parks as well. So we basically in 23 we put pencils down. We said unless it's a home run of a deal, we're not buying anything. So we didn't buy anything in 23 because we needed to stabilize operations. So that's what kind of there was an event that basically created, hey, we need to hire, X number of people to kind of help build the business a little bit more. So therefore we can go out and scale in a year or two, right? So it was gradual, but it was, kind of immediate right away, right? So we bought a lot. We looked up and we're like, shit, things were getting missed. I was doing a lot. Miles was doing a lot operationally because typically when we take over a park, I'm on site typically day one or within the first week. I'm either keeping the manager or hiring a manager typically right away or close to it, passing out notices. Hey, we're the new owners. Here's how you pay. Here's how you do all this. And then you're getting that into the system, getting it all set up. Nowadays, I may not have to go to a park. I probably still will just because it's a part of the business that I actually enjoy. Just because it sets the tone for the park too, right? Like if you're there as the owner versus somebody else, it's just a different conversation that you have with a tenant. I used to tell the tenants that, the old story was don't ever tell the tenant you're the owner, just tell them you work for the management company. I did that in my first probably 5, 6 parks. But then what I found out was it was just hard keeping in my head straight, and they tend to figure out you're the owner. They're not stupid. I always say I have partners though, so I never always, or I say, hey, it's the manager's decision, not mine. I'm just here checking in on things, stuff like that. So, but I do tell people I'm one of the owners most of the time. I don't mind it, and it's a different level of communication when you're the owner. That they tend to seem to take it a little bit more seriously for whatever reason. At least in the beginning. Nowadays, I tenants may reach out to me with issues, but I'm like, I don't know, ask the manager, or go to the manager and ask them. It's their decision, not mine. So like I try not to make decisions that affect the park unless it's like a big financial decision. Even then we still get the input of our managers. So it was
Hmm.
created out of necessity on a gradual basis, but more of a, in 22 we were busy and then we looked up and we were like, dang, we are overly busy for something that we can build out, and we built it out. We built it out a little too late, but it caught up and it was fine.
Hmm. So when you had that super busy year of buying the 14 parks, what was kind of your 80/20? What was kind of the 20% actions that drove 80% of the results for you to build that team out? Is there like a structure or like certain kind of people that you look for?
That was mainly what type of roles we thought we needed. So we definitely needed like a director of operations, somebody that could help manage the day to day kind of, moving of the park with collections enforcement, rule enforcement, kind of handling the managers, dealing with tenants, stuff like that. So we filled that role. And then the collections kind of leasing person actually just happened kind of organically. It was one of our manager's daughters who we were out to dinner with our director of operations. We were kind of on site doing some stuff, and she was talking to her, and she's like, "We should hire her for this role." So we ended up hiring her for that, and then just hiring a few more. Like Miles and I didn't have an executive assistant for a while. We hired that person, kind of handle a lot of our personal stuff, and then also just some back end office stuff that we hired. Also, just putting in different systems into effect that we had available but we didn't institute, with like bill processing, ARs, APs, automating some of our rent collections and notices, just building it out a little bit cleaner of a business. And then what really changed it was doing weekly meetings with our managers. So we didn't really have like, we had KPIs, but it was more of a, it was a mess and chaotic on when this person was paying this time. We instituted weekly meetings. Every week we have a meeting. We go over the same metrics every meeting. It's boring, but we go over the same thing every week. And what happened with our collections was by the sixth, we were collecting maybe 56%. It went to like 90% relatively quickly. So we had bad collections through kind of the month because we maybe weren't enforcing it, or we just weren't keeping track of it in a consistent basis, right? And because our managers would go talk to the residents, post notices, and then it would just be like chaotic on when people would pay. But we kind of systemized that, and we instituted the weekly meeting, and that helped a lot because it kept everybody on track on a weekly basis, and collections went way up, and the rules were enforced a little bit better too. So that's what helped, honestly, pretty dramatically too. So
Got you. So I take it that when you're growing, I mean, for any company, like when you grow it, it's never like, okay, we have a whole bunch of cash. How do we invest it? It's more so like, okay, it's a strategic decision. We have X budget. Should we hire a person to help with this? Should we buy a software? Should we like institute a system? So how did you sort of think through that as you sort of ramped up?
we knew that we had the software in place, but we did institute a few things that the software now offered that would make things a little bit easier. And then we knew we had to make key hires to help offload some things from our plates because we were doing a lot of things in the business, right? And then hiring people and delegating a lot of stuff helped kind of let us work on the business, right? And then also instituting, like, if you do not have KPIs for your business, which are key performance indicators, just it can be simple. It can be like, I have it sitting on my desk. It's cash on hand, occupancy, delinquency, going over the profit and loss statement on a weekly basis. We also hired a CFO to kind of oversee the bookkeeper, and we meet with them weekly. And then just instituting a better project management system as well. So it sounds like very simple, and it is, but we didn't necessarily have that in the first couple years. We were just kind of running by the seat of our pants. We still had, we still had all that, but we just didn't really follow through on a weekly basis to monitor it. So if that makes
Hmm.
sense, it's a lot
Yeah.
simpler than what people think. Just finding that right person. I don't, each role is different and each personality is different. Is more of a, I mean, you can do personality tests and all. You can define your role and all that stuff, which we do, but we kind of, it just was the right fit for that role at that point in time, right? So now if you're making an executive decision, I would say yeah. Like, you're hiring an executive for a high income role, I would have them take personality test, all that stuff. And on the phone interview and kind of getting to know the person and their past experiences, and just, kind of walking through different scenarios is how we typically hire people. And you're going to know, it's a very simple business, not overly complex. So they don't necessarily have to have like a high skill set in like computer programming. It's more about, also, a lot of our employees are women. And I'm not saying that is, women have different personalities than men. It's just and they have different skill sets. So it could be that could be the key. I don't know. I don't think it is, but they're typically, we found that we have more women in our management position, just the way it is, and you'll see that across most portfolios. Can be a lot of women managing parks, but it can also be men. It goes both ways, right? It just depends on the park and the nature of your asset. But more was just defining what roles we needed and then going out to the marketplace and kind of finding it. So
Hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. So it sounds like just through this sort of transition, you took yourself out of the integrator role, right? Like you're not doing as much kind of day-to-day stuff. You're not like opening the envelopes and like answering tenant phone calls. So
correct.
how did you um, how did you find the right person to help do this? I mean, it sounds like it's the director of operations, and how do you keep that person motivated, incentivized, doing the right things day in and day out?
You cannot motivate people. It's just the way it is. They're either going to do it or they're not, right? It's you can motivate them in the short term, but mainly people want to get paid and they want a consistent paycheck. That's really what it is when they're employees. If somebody has like more of an entrepreneurial kind of nature, they're gonna maybe approach you in certain ways, or they're gonna go out and find that themselves, right? But most of the people that we're hiring, we typically, I can't remember how we even hired her. It might have been like we posted a job and she applied, and honestly, I don't remember. The one was organic. It was somebody that we knew, and that's the majority of the time. Is you just know, like, it's through your network that you find people. That's how we found each other. That's how I found Miles as a business partner. It's just something that you just have, like, in my life. What I found is most of the time it happens more organically, and then kind of something comes together at the right time. But yes, if you're hiring roles, we typically, if we can't find somebody within the park to be the manager, because we pass out flyers, right? Hey, we're hiring for a manager. We let everybody know. And then we basically have a task, right? Email your resume to this email address. If they can't email their resume Typically maybe not going to be a fit for us, because we want somebody to be able to be a little bit computer savvy just so they can figure out, because it is a digital world and you do need a phone, unfortunately. So we typically weed that out by kind of setting that task. And then the other one is, is the money that we have available right for you, right? It may not be, right? We interviewed plenty of people that their expectations were way too high for what we could pay. And it just might have been the right fit skill set wise, but we just didn't have that in our budget to pay, a 6-figure position. Our portfolio doesn't demand enough to kind of pay that. It's just the way it is. We're pretty lean, honestly, believe it or not, and that is because I am still, while I'm not as involved as what I used to be, I'm still pretty involved, and I talk to the managers typically weekly. Right? It's not like I'm off not talking to managers. I am talking to managers, and I know what's going on in our parks. Once we buy maybe if we buy another 10 parks, that'll probably change because I won't have enough time to but that's another level, right? And then once you go another level, you hire more people. But we like to keep it lean. I don't need a huge staff. We have our biggest staff is on site, and that is just how real estate is, because it is a on site management business, and a lot of the off site can be done remotely, and a lot of it's I still review it and I still look at it in a lot of my personal time. So I'm looking at it and I'm responding to stuff day in, day out, but it's more like answers to our managers on what to do, or some guidance in that role, right? But we just went out to the marketplace and found somebody. I mean, that's the simplest answer I can give, within our budget. So
yeah, that makes sense. So
people overcomplicate it hiring. They really do.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, it sounds like, from what
Especially
you're saying, real estate is a simple business, right?
It is.
You're collecting rents, you're paying bills, and that's pretty much it. I mean, you're bringing new tenants in, you're maybe improving the project by renovating it, but that's about it. You're not running viral marketing, you're not doing all this crazy stuff, right?
Yeah, and you don't have your customer is the tenant, but that tenant in mobile home parks, it's never an emergency. If their home was on fire, call 911. I can't do shit, right? And I tell the manager same thing. If somebody is fighting or there's an issue, call the cops. We are not law enforcement, right? We are not. We enforce the rules, but we are not the action taker. If somebody is, going crazy and they're fist fighting somebody in the park, or they got a gun, I mean, there's all kinds of different scenarios. We are not there for that. If there is a domestic dispute or a dog bite or somebody's dog is running loose, yeah, you want to enforce the rules, but we are not going to take severe action to correct it, right? That is not our place as landlords. There are services for that our property taxes go to, and I always say to any manager, let them call 911, let them deal with it, and then we'll handle the repercussions.
Yeah. I think the distinction that some people forget is that you, as the operator, you're there to enforce rules, not the law, right? Like you can fine people, you can not renew their lease, but you're not there yelling at people, doing all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So when it comes to doing deals, I mean, you've done a variety of deals in terms of different sizes with different people, different structures. Is there a framework for you to figure out, like, okay, is this a deal that I want to do? Is this a person I want to partner with? What sort of goes through your mind before taking on that one new project?
So it would be like a new project with a new, let's just kind of talk about how we do deals now, because it has changed and evolved. We used to do kind of, when we were hot and heavy, buying a ton of deals. If somebody had a bunch of capital and they had investors, we would partner with them after some initial conversations. And we may not take operational control, or we may have like a 50-50 split of operations. We may run it and then let them run it if we need to. We like to have, so two things, how I kind of distinguish. Mainly it comes down to risk, right? And you and I have had this conversation before. What is our risk to the deal? If our risk is by I'm signing on the loan as a personal guarantor, I pretty much, unless I know that person over an extended period of time and I know their track record and I know them personally, I'm okay guaranteeing a loan that way, because it's fairly risky to guarantee a loan and let somebody else run it, in my eyes. We want full control operationally, typically, right? That doesn't mean that we have to be the biggest owner of the deal. We just want control day in, day out, because our name is on the loan. Now, if your name is on the loan as well, then that's a conversation that can go in a different direction of who's going to run it day to day, how you going to do that. But if we're going to run the deal and maybe you're bringing capital to the deal, and we're signing on the loan and you're not, we're going to have full operational authority within certain parameters, obviously. And if something happens, you could step in, whatever have you. But it all comes down to kind of like, what are we risking and is it worth that risk, right? Some deals are not worth it for us to get involved if the risk outweighs the reward by us maybe not having control of the deal, and that person could go, they may not be as good as what they thought, or they get busy with life and life happens to them, and then they're still kind of managing the deal, but they're not doing a good job. And then we have to outlay capital to service the loan, right? Because the loan, it might not be cash flowing as well. We've done that before. We've had to do that. Or things within the business plan changes, right? You get hit with a huge property tax bill that you didn't expect, right? Because some states and counties have kind of certain rules to where they can challenge your assessment, and they do. So we've had those plans go awry to where the property taxes went 5x and we didn't expect it. We knew it was going to go up, but now we're writing checks that the property can't cash because it's coming from our personal accounts. So it all comes down to risk. If I'm not signing on the loan, but maybe we're going to run the park, that's a little bit lower risk profile for me. If we're bringing capital to the deal, but we're not signing on a loan, I would still like to have some control, but I don't necessarily need full control if that person has a track record, or I believe in that person enough to run the deal. That's really where it kind of comes down to in our deal cycle and investment criteria nowadays, is what is the risk to us and is it worth it, right? Back when I started, I was willing to take on a little bit more risk to buy more deals, but nowadays I want a little bit more control if I'm going to sign my name on the loan. If it's a non-recourse loan, totally different conversation. And it's typically large enough to where that can solve a lot of inefficiencies, and a lot of the risk profile goes down when it comes to that type of scenario. So it all comes down to just the risk of the deal and the risk that I'm personally going to be taking on.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. And just going a little deeper on the, call it, partnership aspect, I mean, what were, maybe like one or two important lessons that you learned, maybe from partnerships that didn't work out, that you're like, okay, this is where I see a flag coming up and I need to look into this more? Or what are things that you let slide?
If somebody has the potential to take over operations, if they think we're doing a bad job, we define that bad job. Excuse me. We define what the metrics are and what would allow them to kind of step in within certain parameters. But we also want them to have the same risk we do. So if we're splitting, let's say we go buy a deal, let's just say we're JV and joint venturing on a deal versus raising money, because it's a completely different conversation. We're going to own it 50-50. We're all signing on the loan, but we're gonna run the day to day, right? That is a different conversation if we need to hand over operations than like if you're not signing on the loan and you still own 50% of the deal, but maybe because you brought all the capital and then you all of a sudden want to start running it, but our name is on the loan, the risk tolerance for us is a lot higher because our name is on the loan. Because if you start to not perform and maybe we weren't performing, then we're both basically screwed, and somebody is going to be paying that bill, and it's typically going to be the loan guarantor is who they're going after. So I'm harping on the loan guarantor a little bit more because the MH space, anything you guarantee a lot of loans because that's just the nature of the business at this point in time. Same with RV parks, you're gonna have to guarantee loans unless you're getting a seller financing deal where it's non-recourse. The deal profile with the risk and the reward, which this book right here, Sam Zell, talks about highly in it. Yeah, I mean it's the risk that you're willing to take and want to take, right? So if we're raising money and somebody has investors and can bring the investors to us, we may not require them to sign on a loan, but we want to operate it. I know I'm kind of answering the same question, I'm giving the same answer, but what it comes down to also is what is everybody's skill set? And if we're both operators and that's how we make our money, it may not work out. It could, but it may not, right? It kind of puts the profile of the deal together a little bit tougher. But there's a lot of deals that get done with a lot of different operators kind of combining forces. And it can work and it does work. You just have to define up front who's doing what and when, because somebody could step in, but they may not want to, right? I'm in plenty of deals to where people operate the deals and they work out fine and I don't do a thing. I still look at the numbers, make sure that the process is moving forward, but it just depends on where you are personally wise, right? Because I may be able to sponsor a loan, but you may not have ever owned a park. So my experience and net worth can sponsor a loan and you're going to run the deal, which is totally fine. We just kind of have to vet you. And it's nothing tough that we vet people, but we've also been on the receiving end of people vetting us hard. And then we find out like they don't know anything and their decision making is, it's not very good. I'm like, why are you guys making these decisions?
Checklist
We're,
warriors.
we're like, yeah, we're like spending cash and that what we're making that decision on is not increasing our revenue. So why are we taking that risk, right? It's a pretty simple business decision. It sounds stupid and simple, but people overcomplicate real estate and people overcomplicate business. Most of the time, if you take care of the park, you put money back into the park, and you're not gouging people on rent, people are going to pay their bills and they're going to be quiet. I mean, meaning like they just want somewhere safe, clean, and affordable to live, and they just want to go about their day to day. They don't want to cause trouble. It's typically the 80-20 rule, right? 80% of your problems are going to come from 20% of your people. It's just how it is. Even internally there's always problems, like from workers, from people, there's always issues. So the more you grow, the more stress you're going to have to be able to take, right? A lot of people don't talk about the stress of the business too. Guaranteeing loans is not for the faint of heart, right? There are times in the real estate cycle where your property value may go below the loan amount, right? So you may have to personally service a loan. It is like the last 24 months people have been doing that. These banks will challenge your debt service coverage ratio. If your NOI, your net operating income, falls below, I know we're getting kind of in the nitty gritty of real estate, but if it falls below your service metric, you have to then outflow some capital. So there is stresses. Let's talk about the stresses of running a business, right? It is real. And for me, my stress level has gone down in the last 36 months because we've hired people versus when we were growing, it was really high. And the reason I was so stressed is because I hated when my phone rang from a property. Like, not my manager calling me. If we didn't have a manager or they didn't answer the phone, I had it set up to where I would answer it. Or a certain asset class, my phone would ring and it just wasn't, that's just not my skill set, right? I don't mind my phone ringing, but I don't want tenants calling me day in, day out. And that is like, to me, like being the manager for a long period of time is probably the most stressful time that I will have, because that's just not my personality and my skill set, right? So there's plenty of stresses in owning businesses. If you don't want stress, do not own real estate. There are going to be stresses, or don't own a business. Be an LP if you have more capital and just work your day job, and and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But real estate is an illiquid investment and you're not going to get your money back quickly in most commercial assets. So it's going to
Totally.
take time.
Couple final questions. How do you handle that stress? I mean, everyone handles it differently, but how do you do it?
Drinking a lot? No, I'm kidding. But that is the solution that a lot of people take to, right? They do recreational. I mean, marijuana is legal in a lot of states. I'm not saying I do it, but a lot of people do that. A lot of entrepreneurs are kind of a goofy breed a lot of times, right? So they're always on the forefront of doing cold plunges and all these meditations and all these miracle mornings. I did all that to like help lower my stress, but it actually made me more stressed because if I didn't do it, then I was like my whole day was ruined, right? So um, I think consistently just doing the same thing day in, day out, have a routine. That is important. I am not a 5 a.m. wake up guy. I wake up between typically 7:30 and 8:30. That is why I do what I do. I'm more of like, I'm up till, 11 or midnight typically. So I tried to get up at 5 a.m. and 6 a.m. I've tried all that. But just building your own routine, I think working out kind of does help with some stress levels. Being a part of different networks to talk about your problems, like going to real estate events, going to different masterminds if you're joining them, because you're all experiencing the same problems. But as entrepreneurs, we typically don't talk about our problems, or we don't necessarily we feel like we're alone in the world because we don't have coworkers, right? It's a very lonely space. I mean, I work from home and nobody's at my house except for my dog, and my wife has a job, so it's like you get very isolated a lot of times. So I think going out to different networking events and talking about issues that you're facing, people are going to face the same issues. What a big stress relief for me typically is like I like to go out, like typically Friday mornings I will go out and fish by myself. Like people always ask like, "Well, I'm always open." I'm like, "That's my like alone time, right?" So I'm out there fishing for a couple hours. And that for me can be a stress relief, but honestly, the biggest stress relief is just realizing that there's always stress. That's actually probably a positive. And I'm not like, you got to figure out what your stressors are. If something's consistently causing you headache and heartburn, you got to figure out how to get rid of that problem. And if you cannot, then you may need to sell your real estate or remove yourself from that role that you're currently doing, right? Because there are ways to kind of alleviate that. And mine was like, we owned a motel and we didn't have a manager at the time. And when somebody called to book a reservation, it would ring to my phone. My phone rang all the time. And I hated that. I was stressed. So we had to hire a manager or hire a call answering service, which we ended up doing. So that took a lot off my plate, which was awesome. But you got to figure out what your stressors are and why it's stressing you and how to solve that problem. But you're always going to be stressed. That's just the nature of life and owning a business. And that's just a part of dealing with it. Also, I think like I can be a procrastinator a lot of times. So that can cause some stress internally if I put something off. I found just kind of doing it or doing it within windows of like, hey, I scheduled this task then this time. Like I pay bills Monday and Thursday. I have it on my calendar. I do it every Monday, every Thursday. Having meetings like with your managers on a weekly basis at the same time, just kind of building a routine to the business kind of creates the chaotic entrepreneurial brain and entrepreneurial kind of the way we kind of are and we're kind of wired. Giving a little bit of routine helps because when you have a W-2, you have a routine. You go to work, you do this, you do that, you go home at 5 o'clock. There is a routine that people don't talk about. So creating a routine that fits your wants and needs and why you're doing it helps as well. Like I don't do typically, like I try not to do phone calls before noon with or podcasts or anything like that. So I can get everything I need out of the way and then I have the afternoon kind of to do it. I also work out in the afternoon. I don't work out in the morning. Like a lot of people work out in the morning. I typically am not that fired up in the morning. So that's just me. So
Yeah, love it. So yeah, I appreciate you sharing all your wisdom, Ryan. And for the audience, how can they connect with you? Who are you looking to connect with? And how can they learn more?
yeah, so our website's treesidecapital.com. You can find us through there. You can also find me just at my name on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram, all the social media platforms. I'm typically pretty easily accessible. If somebody message me, I'm fairly free to answer questions or hop on a quick phone call. I don't mind helping out. And if somebody has a deal that they don't know how to put together, I'm happy to take a look at it for them as well.
Well, final question. What's one thing you wish you can tell yourself 10 years ago?
I don't want to use the cliche of buy more deals, but honestly, buy more deals because there was such an inflationary environment and cap rate compression in the mobile home park space that would have been awesome to own more. But like getting away from the cliches, I would say focus on cash flow in the deal to your personal pocket, right? Because figuring out that how do you pay yourself when you're raising money is a really, really tough thing to do, especially when properties don't go as planned. How do you get a consistent cash flow coming in? Because a lot of times when you're raising money, these deals don't cash flow to you very, very highly. Focus on cash flow a little bit more over the course, or figure out how to generate revenue from the businesses that go into your personal pocket maybe a little bit quicker. But I also didn't need that at that time, so that would be my main point of advice from 10 years ago would be focus on cash flow while also focusing on deals and hire sooner. Like hiring sooner definitely would have helped.
Love it. Love it. Well, thank you so much for your wisdom, Ryan. This is a great session.
Of course. Thanks, Leo.